You know, I gotta say, of all the entries in this franchise, this one does not reign as king. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about yet another film I'm definitely late to discuss, The Kingsman. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it, or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. But let's not waste any more time and let's talk about The Kingsman. This takes place in the early years of the 20th century, where the Kingsman Agency is formed to stand against the cabal plotting a war to wipe out millions. This is a prequel to the Kingsman movies, focused on a completely different set of characters, and once again, it's written and directed by Matthew Vaughn. Now, while I'm not a die-hard fan of the series itself, though I did enjoy both other films, I am a fan of Matthew Vaughn, whose films I've generally enjoyed and who I find to be a refreshing voice in mainstream genre filmmaking. And if there's one thing I always appreciated about the Kingsman movies, it's how they injected some goofy, frantic energy into the spy thriller, a genre that, truthfully, I'm not always quite the biggest fan of. I'd say while I don't actively dislike it as a whole, it's one of my least favorite subgenres, but the Kingsman movies always felt more like comedies than spy films, which I appreciated. Now, as stated, this is a look at the formation of the original Kingsman, though otherwise doesn't try to force a huge connection to the other films and try to answer questions we weren't looking for. But because this mostly keeps things separate and takes place in a completely different time period, taking place during World War I, it also means this doesn't have to feel tied to the tone and feel of those other two films. So, that's for better or worse, depending on how you like these sort of films and how forgiving you're willing to be regarding this film's faults. Now, what I will say is, the cast all do a great job. Ralph Fiennes is our lead, and he's reliable as always, getting the most emotional arc, where he tries to make it his personal mission to make sure his son, played by Harris Dickinson, doesn't wind up in the war. And while Fiennes is compelling here, there are a few other bright spots in this all-star cast, some of which include Jean Hunso as a member of the Spy Network, Charles Dance as historical figure Lord Kitchener, as well as Rhys Ifans, and easily the film's most over-the-top and most marketed performance as Grigory Rasputin. However, while the cast is solid, this ultimately didn't work for me, as it's one of the most tonally confusing movies I've seen in some time. It feels like Vaughn cobbled together two different movies. One is a goofy comedy that fits within the Kingsman universe, and one that's a straightforward World War I spy movie. And it results in a feel that's just all over the place. One minute you'll have Rasputin acting like a kooky, over-the-top caricature, bouncing around and making grand, ridiculous proclamations, but then the next minute you'll have this overly serious story about spies fighting in the war that plays into all the tropes in the genre. And while it really doesn't work as a serious spy thriller in my opinion, I'm honestly confused by the route it did take, because it clearly presents itself as trying to distance itself from the other films, given the more serious tone right out of the gate, yet it never actually fully commits to doing so, because then it tries coming back to some jarring over-the-top comedy that just didn't fit with the other storyline. And I like movies that contain humor to break the tension, but this will swing from one extreme to another in one of the most jarring ways, and it was kind of frustrating, especially since some of those extremes I wasn't a fan of. Now, if you like these sort of movies, you might not mind the tonal inconsistencies as much, since at least it contains all the usual elements of the genre. And for some, that might be enough. I know I'm forgiving of faults of other films because they contain elements of other genres that I'm a big fan of, like horror movies, comedies, or whatever. So I get it, and I know there are people who enjoy this just for delivering a basic spy thriller. But for me, as someone who's not really into these particular movies, I found this to be a bit of a slog. While I don't mind if the film plays things a little more straightforward, anything beyond Fiennes' arc gets way too bogged down in heavy-handed exposition that will bring the pacing to a grinding halt. And even as a serious film, it lacks a lot of the thrills that make spy thrillers any sort of fun. And again, I say that as someone who's generally not the biggest fan of the more serious spy thrillers. And because of the film's pacing, it makes this feel dragged out, going on for a grueling 2.5 hours. The parts of the film most heavily advertised in the trailers only comprised the first hour, and when I thought we were approaching the end and realized we still had an hour and a half to go, I did audibly groan a bit. And after that hour mark, that's where the film really shifts into overly serious mode almost all the way through, and that's where things take a huge turn downhill. And as a result, when we get to the actual formation of the Kingsman, it doesn't feel like a satisfying experience, which was pretty unfortunate. Overall, The Kingsman was a disappointment, and easily my least favorite of Matthew Vaughn's films to date. While it's got a good cast, it's a totally confusing film that goes on for way too long and gets bogged down in heavy-handed, overly serious exposition that repeatedly clashes with trying to fit in within the Kingsman universe. If you like spy thrillers, you might not mind this, but this ultimately didn't work for me. The Kingsman gets a 4 out of 10. So let me know, did you see The Kingsman, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Is it your favorite of these films? Is it one of your favorite Matthew Vaughn movies? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it. And for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.